Welcome to this interview. I'm Giorgio Rutelli, editor-in-chief of Formiche.net, and this is an interview in our series of talks that we're having on the subject of the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And today we have with us here in Formiche Rachel Rizzo. She's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and at the Europe Center of the Atlantic Council. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So we are approaching this date, and so we are trying to, have a little assessment of what's happening, and so I think a good way to start is to talk about the transatlantic relations. It has changed in the past year. It has probably gotten stronger than it was before. There are also polls in Italy, especially, which was a country that in the past has had a complicated and roller coaster relationship with the United States and NATO in general, and the Western alliance in general. There are polls lately that actually show that Italians are they have more trust in the US, and they have way less trust in Russia and China. So how do you see the transatlantic relationship after 1 year of war in Ukraine?
Absolutely. So I think in order to understand where we are now, you have to go back to Biden's election. And repairing the transatlantic relationship was a key aspect of his administration. Just look at the people that he hired right off the bat. Pro-Atlanticist professionals who have been in this business for a long time, who have been pro-EU, pro-NATO for a very long time. So you really got the sense that he was committed to both the European Union and NATO, and in general repairing the relationship with Europe. And when you look back at the Russian invasion of Ukraine last February, it took everyone by surprise, including the United States. I said what I said, but I also want to be clear that I don't think that the Biden administration was planning on focusing on Russia. They were very much focused on looking at the Indo-Pacific region, treating China as the pacing threat, and really focusing their attention there. And I think it became clear very early on in the invasion that this was not going to be a quick war like people thought it would be, that we could really see ourselves in this for the long haul, that we had to support Ukraine, and that we had to pull the Europeans along with us. And I think the Biden administration has done a really good job of doing just that. I think he's played a really important role in leading in terms of supporting Ukraine with military weapons, with economic and financial aid, but also keeping together the unity between Western countries in terms of a broad ranging sanctions regime against Russia that is actually in some ways hurting people's own economies, but they see how important it is to push back against Russia, to push back on this idea that modern day borders can be changed by force. And I think Biden deserves a lot of credit for that. I think at the same time, you haven't seen him be really frustrated, I should say. You haven't seen him be publicly frustrated with Europeans, because I think he understands that the debate here looks different than it does in the United States. And so I think when you take all of those things together, it really paints a picture of a president that is pro-transatlanticist and who is seen very favorably here in the United States, who is seen favorably here in both Italy and Europe in general.
Okay, so how do you see, talking about Italy, the transition between the Draghi government, who was, of course, one of the main architects from this side of this rapprochement with the American administration, and the Meloni government that has, vowed to keep on the same track. But has this been perceived by the United States? Do you think that the Meloni government has demonstrated its commitment to the transatlantic relationship?
Well, first, I think that Mario Draghi is seen by the United States as this bastion of stability in a political system that is oftentimes volatile here in Italy. And so I think the transition between him and Meloni was a little bit of a concern in the United States, especially when it came to discussions about domestic issues, social issues that might not be in line with what the Biden administration or the United States stands for. And there was this broad worry that this right-wing populism that we had seen take hold in places like Hungary and France in some case, and Poland in some case, was also taking hold here in Italy. But then when she was elected, you saw very pro-European Union messaging, pro-NATO, pro-Ukraine, actually being open in the lead up to the election on Italian support for Ukraine, which I think was a surprise to all of us. And so I think in general, the Meloni government is seen as being pro-transatlanticist, which is a pleasant surprise for the United States, because I think on the outset there was a lot of nervousness surrounding the fall of the previous government and the entrance of this new government.
Yeah, and especially that happens a lot, but the press, especially in Italy, also was trying probably to describe this incoming government as more dangerous than it actually was. So that, of course, has also an impact on the outside image of a country. Talking about Europe and how has Europe changed in the past year, you study and you have lived in Germany. How do you see Germany right now? Because in the past year it has gone through a lot of changes. Chancellor Scholz has committed Germany to a new military and new strategic stance that has not, we have not seen for decades, because Germany always tried to be this power that was not menacing and threatening since the end of the Second World War. Is Scholz delivering on this promise of strengthening the military and strengthening Germany's role and Germany's role as a main character in the international stage, which has not been, if not for commercial and mercantilistic approaches?
So when you look back at Chancellor Scholz's speech to the Bundestag in the days following Russia's invasion, this is seen as a watershed moment in German foreign policy, this Zeitenwende speech. And I think in many ways, when he's talking about the Zeitenwende, or this historical turning point, what he was describing was factually what was happening. But what the United States and many other Europeans heard was this realization that Germany needs to change the role that it's playing both in Europe and geopolitically around the world. And that speech, I don't think that's exactly what he was committing to, but I think that he came around to that position after it became clear that Germany did need to change the way that it was doing things. And I think Germany deserves a lot of credit for the strides that it's made in the last year. This isn't just about spending more on defense, although that's certainly a part of it. Revitalizing the Bundeswehr that has been historically underfunded is certainly a part of it. Decreasing German dependence on Russian energy is certainly a part of it, and they've done a great job there. But this is about much more than that. It's about fundamentally changing the German mindset that is so entrenched in the way that Germany sees itself and sees itself as a player on the world stage. And that is much harder to do. And I think the jury is still out on this one. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something that's going to happen, I think, even within a couple of years. It's going to take time for that. But I think the foundation is there. I think Scholz has set the foundation for that role. And so I think he deserves a lot of credit. I think we should be looking closely at the China strategy that's going to be coming out from Germany pretty soon here. I know that there is a lot of worry on behalf of many people that Germany is walking into the same trap with China economically that it did with Russia in terms of its energy independence. And I think Germany is aware of that worry, and so we'll see how they figure that out. There's also a national security strategy. It's first ever that's going to be released in the coming weeks and months. And so it's really going to be interesting to see how Germany lays out its national security priorities for the first time and how that's perceived both in Europe and in the United States.
Yes, you mentioned the revised China strategy that was partly leaked in the past couple of months. And that is, again, a side effect of the war, because the war that has awakened a lot of Germans to its relationship with Russia, and that has stopped projects like Nord Stream 2, which was ready to go a year and a half ago, has also changed its attitude towards China, and especially it's changed the expectancy from other countries towards Germany. Like, other countries are now looking at Germany saying, please do not do the same thing as you did with Russia, with China. So, but do you think that the German entrepreneurial community, or in general, are ready, I mean, the economy part of the equation, are ready to sever ties, or at least stop investing so much in China, or in the China relationship, in the China dependence, as maybe the political or strategic or military elite is?
I think it's always difficult to pull the business community along to a position that might mean significant decreases in their bottom lines. And we saw with Scholz's trip to China late last year that he brought a group of German business officials with him, which goes to show just how important this relationship is for the German economy. There used to be this phrase, what's good for General Motors is good for the United States. And you could say the same thing about a company like Volkswagen today. What's good for Volkswagen is good for Germany. And the fact is, a company like Volkswagen still sees China as a major, major export market. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. And so the question is, how do you still have that business relationship with China while ensuring that national security matters aren't compromised? It's the exact same debate that we're having in the United States right now. Biden has been pretty hawkish on China. He's continued a lot of Trump-era policies, and so there is this sense that there's not a desire to completely decouple, but there is a sense that we need to make sure that our national security is first and foremost in our minds when we're thinking about our relationship with China. And I don't know that Germany is quite there yet, but I think that they're aware that that's what they have to be thinking about, although it's much more difficult to implement policies than it is to talk about those policies.
Yeah. So one last issue that is an outstanding issue probably between the United States and Europe is the Inflation Reduction Act. And you mentioned Volkswagen, and in the past days, weeks, Germany's and France's ministers went to DC to talk about IRA and to talk about investments and to find a way to, other European countries were a little taken aback by this move, because they thought that they would go there and defend Volkswagen and Renault, or in general take care of their domestic business and not work as a European envoy, but work as in the interest of their own economic systems. So do you think that there will be a way to cooperate and to find a common ground on the issue of subsidies and on green transition? Because here in Europe we are quite divided. So how is this seen by the United States? Because probably if Europe was coalesced around one position, then maybe the US could say, okay, let's deal with this position, but we have many different positions here. So I'm guessing that also from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, people are looking at Europe, not really sure how to deal with this approach.
Yeah.
What do you think? How do you think, is there going to be a way to patch things up between the European Commission and the Biden administration in the subject of subsidies? Because rightfully so, the Americans could say, we cannot wait for you to solve your internal discussion. We have to have this transition starting, and we have to run because we have China, running faster on some of the issues like solar panels or wind turbines, stuff like that. So how do you see this issue?
So first, I think it's important to understand the journey that the Inflation Reduction Act took in the United States. This was obviously built off of the Build Back Better Act that was stymied by Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kristen Sinema. And what resulted after months of very, very painful negotiations was this landmark legislation that everyone is pretty excited about. I wonder, and this is sort of a pessimistic view, like my question is, did the staffers that were drafting this legislation like assume that the United States had a free trade agreement with the EU? I mean, really, that's sort of the first thing that came to my mind, because it's not completely bonkers to say that. I think that's definitely a possibility here. But what I also think is that the Europeans are really overreacting. I mean, really.
Okay.
They have pushed the United States for years to not only recognize climate change and sustainability as important issues. Remember, in the United States, the issue of climate change is still highly partisan. We are not where Europe is. We're maybe getting there, but when you look at Europe, it's something like 93% of Europeans view climate change as not only legitimate, but like a serious threat. You would never see numbers like that in the United States because it's still so divided between Democrats and Republicans. It's a totally partisan issue. So I think that the fact that the United States was able to pass landmark climate legislation is a huge deal, and it's something that the Europeans have been pushing us on for a long time, and we finally got there. I don't know where the two sides are going to be able to find common ground, like where we'll come out on the other side of this. But I do think that we should be focusing on the positives and working together where possible rather than the negatives. And the negatives really are these, electric vehicle subsidies that are a very, very small part of this much broader legislation. And so I think focusing on that one thing isn't that helpful in the long run. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel Rizzo.
Absolutely.